So big piece of news coming in today. The spokesperson of the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, has announced that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, will be making a visit to India fairly soon. This is an announcement that has come in today. No dates have been announced just yet, but the Kremlin spokesperson saying that a visit by the Russian president is impending soon. The dates will be announced in due course, and both sides are working on that visit. So an interesting announcement by the Kremlin today, and of course happening at a time when India and Russia have had a series of important bilateral engagements. I mean, just in the last couple of months, just last month, of course, there was the BRICS summit at the sideline in Kazan, and that took place in Russia. And of course, Prime Minister Modi met with President Putin on the sidelines of the summit. So they had a fairly comprehensive discussion there. And of course, in July, you had the Indian Prime Minister go to Moscow and meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. They had extensive discussions. So this is, of course, building up on that. We're not exactly sure what specifically is being is going to be the agenda of this visit. It could be, of course, the India-Russia annual summit that takes place once a year and generally has the leaders meet. It, of course, took place in July, so there could be some conversation about having it earlier next year. But of course, that is not entirely clear at this point in time. So we're going to find out more about the agenda as that story develops. But it's interesting because we thought it would be a good opportunity to just take a quick snapshot about what the two leaders have discussed in the past this year, what exactly they've been up to. We will sort of talk about how the different aspects of the relationship have evolved over the last year, what the two leaders have discussed in their past meetings. So in July, when Prime Minister Modi went for the bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin, of course, this was a controversial meeting, you might remember, because it took place right as the NATO summit was taking place in Washington. So this was seen as somewhat objectionable by some of India's Western partners, but that was what was going on at that point in time. But what did the two leaders discuss? They talked about improving trade between India and Russia and making sure it hits around $100 billion by 2030. Now, this was a target that if you had talked about a couple of years ago, people would have laughed at you, because the India-Russia relationship outside of energy and oil has become really moribund. There's not much going on there, but the onset of the Russia-Ukraine war has meant that, in fact, India has purchased a large amount of discounted oil from Russia. Of course, the discounts have reduced over a period of time, but it has purchased a lot of discounted oil from Russia. It has refined it in India and has exported it on the global market. So that has really boosted the India-Russia relationship. It's in the tens of billions of dollars, the kind of business that India and Russia are doing on energy. And now the idea is that India and Russia will have a $100 billion trade relationship by 2030. There are also conversations about having a free trade area between India and the Eurasian Economic Union. That is something that the two sides want to work on. So that on the economic side, that's what India is going to want. It's going to want more access to Russian Eurasian markets for its goods. So it wants tariff adjustments and so on and so forth, non-tariff barriers to be removed. So on economics, that's the agenda. There's, because nuclear power projects as well. There is the Kudankulam nuclear project, which Russia is helping India develop. There was some conversation on that between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin. They also talked about future collaborations in the energy infrastructure space. Of course, military and defense ties were also ongoing, and there is now, of course, some conversation about keeping that defense relationship going, which is not, it has not been the easiest relationship, mind you, because of the Russian war in Ukraine. There have been delays to key components that India had wanted, as well as key defense platforms. One example, of course, was the S-400 missile system, which was delayed for a significant period of time. So that was a problem. And remember that Russia is an absolutely important and vital defense supplier to India. Has been for decades now, and the conflict in Ukraine, number one, raised a lot of questions about the efficacy of Russian weapon systems. Of course, there's a big debate on that, but there's also an additional element there that the Russian war in Ukraine created certain delays in the Russian supply chain because of sanctions, because of the needs of the Russian military apparatus itself. That have created some problems for India. So that is absolutely something that India and Russia discussed. Of course, there was the controversial case of Indians being taken to Russia. There's about 100 of them who have been taken under often false pretenses to Russia and being made to fight for the Russian military. About 9 of them have died, if my memory serves me correctly. And that has been a serious topic of concern between the two sides. India released, earlier this year, a very frank and a sharp statement asking Russia to work at this very, very closely in terms of making sure that these Indians are discharged because they were taken to fight for the Russian military under false pretenses. This has been a huge concern for India, but that has not exactly worked out totally. There are, of course, some people who have been released, and the Russian military has acknowledged this problem. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has also recognized it. But the question now moving forward is, will a substantial progress be made on this issue? Will the remaining individuals in the Russian military also be released and will also be returned to safety? So that was a question that was discussed a great deal during Prime Minister Modi's visit in July. So massive scope of conversation there that took place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Vladimir Putin. Then they met, of course, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, which happened in Kazan in Russia in October. And now this new announcement by the Kremlin that, in fact, the two leaders will meet again at some point in time. President Putin coming to India, but we're not exactly sure what it is going to be about. But we also, it will be an interesting idea to talk to you today because of some other major developments that have taken place today, of course, over the last 2 days actually, which is on the Russian and on the Western side. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, approved the supply of approved Ukraine to use long-range ATACMS missiles that to strike deep inside Russian territory. This was a debate that was going on for a very long period of time. Ukraine believed that it would give it significant military ability to inflict military damage on Russia, the same way that Russia is inflicting it on Ukraine. And there was a huge debate. President Biden and Washington for a long time were concerned about allowing Ukraine to use these missiles because of the fact that it could escalate the conflict and widen the war between Russia and Ukraine. But in the final days of the Biden administration, President Biden seems to have approved this supply of this usage of ATACMS missiles for long-range strikes into Russian territory. So that has been a controversial question. Lots of people talking about how this could lead to a further escalation in the conflict in Ukraine and is an irresponsible move. Others saying that, look, with President Donald Trump coming in, set to return to office as the 47th President of the United States, you're going to see a diplomatic solution to the conflict. You're going to see a negotiated end. President Zelensky himself, in an interview just a couple of days ago, acknowledged that in a year or so, this conflict will have to be brought to an end. It will probably be through a negotiated solution. This is an interview that he had done. And it seems that he said that Donald Trump may be someone who could accelerate the idea of peace coming back to Ukraine. But this could be an attempt by the West, by Joe Biden in Washington, to give Ukraine something it has asked for a very long time, to create military pressure on Russia and bring it to the negotiating table and make sure that the terms of the agreement that take place between America, between the West and Russia, between Ukraine and Russia, happens to be on terms that Ukraine would be more happy with. So this could be a negotiating tactic in some sense, but it's been responded to by Russia by today with President Vladimir Putin revising the nuclear doctrine of Russia. Your nuclear doctrines are complicated things, but very, very simply, what Vladimir Putin has done is that he has altered Russia's nuclear posture and what Russia will see as a nuclear threat. Very simply, he said that any conventional attack on Russia by a non-nuclear power, if it is supported by a nuclear power, will be considered joint attack on the Russian Federation. So basically, the idea is that, of course, he's talking about, for example, just to paint a scenario, Ukraine is a non-nuclear power, and if it is supported by a nuclear power, which in this case would be a number of Western countries, including the United States, if such a grouping, such a military alliance, a non-nuclear power supported by a nuclear power, like Ukraine and the United States, launch a conventional attack on Russia, then it will be considered a joint attack on the Russian Federation. And so it broadens how Russia sees aggression. So, playing into those Western fears that actually if the West backs Ukraine too much, then Russia will see it as a joint attack and therefore will also feel free to escalate conflict against the United States as well as other nuclear armed powers in the West. So that is a major change that he made. Also, the revised doctrine has also lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. Typically, countries are very, very clear about the circumstances in which they would consider using nuclear weapons, given the destruction that they could wreak, the cost in terms of human lives, the cost for the international system. This revised doctrine actually lowers or loosens some of these restrictions. It says that, any massive aerial attack on Russia, which could include ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, etc., could trigger a nuclear response. And so this is sort of expanding the conditions under which Russia could actually respond to a conventional attack on it. So this again is in many ways seen to be a response to what has happened with President Joe Biden allowing Ukraine to use these ATACMS missiles for long-range strikes into Ukraine, into Russian territory, apologies. And this is, of course, him trying to send the message that, look, this is going to, for those who fear what this decision by Joe Biden could mean, I'm going to confirm those fears. I'm going to confirm that, in fact, we will be ready to use massive retaliation. This will lead to an escalation in the conflict if you allow Ukraine to take these escalatory measures. So that is absolutely something that is a significant development. Also, of course, Putin making clear that aggression against Russia's ally Belarus, which is, of course, another Eastern European country very close to Russia, it also includes using nuclear weapons in response to aggression against Belarus. So this is a major development. Of course, the spokesperson of the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, saying that these actions are planned earlier in the year, but really the sense seems to be that this is in response to what Joe Biden announced in terms of the usage of ATACMS missiles. So we have our show Crossfire that comes out every single day, and in today's episode of Crossfire, we have actually explained in great detail the issue of the ATACMS missile, what it means for the Russian-Ukraine conflict, why America has decided to do what it has done, and the Russian response to this latest development. We will keep you absolutely updated on this story, but we wanted to update you about this potential meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, President Putin's potential visit to India, as well as some of the immediate context in which this visit may be taking place, or what has happened over the last couple of days that creates increasing destabilization in the international sphere and is, of course, linked to Russia and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Thank you so much for watching us on India Today Global. We will keep you absolutely updated on this story.